Why, hello, listeners. Welcome back to Studio Miguel's podcast artcast thing that I have going here. This is David McLean. Thanks for joining me today. I am painting another of my series of Persian pickles. You may or may not recall that this is a series I started at the 1st of July 2010. It was a self-imposed art project where every day during the month I would design a different paisley design inspired by a variety of different things. This particular theme was inspired by some dear friends of mine who are huge Texas Longhorn fans. They're a football team for one of the major schools here in Texas that I should know, and I don't, so I hate to admit that. I do know that their colors are orange and white, however, so I decided that that was going to be my color scheme for this Texas Longhorn, Texas-inspired theme. And as always with these kind of digital paintings, I will start off with blocking in my color. For this particular case, you saw a second ago I popped out to the web and did a little research on color for the Texas Longhorn, and then realized I use a little tool that I love called Cooler. I realized I could probably search for Texas Longhorns in there, and they would give me a color palette, and sure enough, I had like 10 to choose from. So I started off my painting with a little masking work, since I surrounded my paisley design with some barbed wire in order to paint that. Quickly, I decided to paint a quick mask, which is what you see here. If you're not familiar with quick masks in Photoshop, they're a huge time saver. Very easy to paint. It's just a mode you switch into, and you're painting with black and white or shades of gray in order to dictate areas that you want to be selected. You'll see me rotate this around a lot. This is a feature introduced in CS4 that allows you to rotate your canvas. That is simply wonderful. It allows more natural paint strokes whenever you're working on a particular piece. This one was actually kind of a interesting challenge because it was the color palette was really limited. You know, to this day, I kind of had this vision in my head, and I was never really able to realize it. And it was just orange and white with a few hue shifts or value shifts in some areas to darker colors. And I don't know if I got lazy or I just wasn't able to realize that. In the end, I ended up introducing a little bit of green to the design in order to add what I felt like was a little pizzazz. And you know, I always want to spend more time painting these paisleys than I actually have to paint them. When you look at a real paisley design, there's just so many colors. In fact, I was doing some research. It's interesting, the original paisley designs had as many as 35 individual colors hand-stitched, which is what makes them so beautiful and so amazing. They were creating those originally in Sri Lanka and India and Persia, hence the name Persian Pickle. So anyway, it's really not doing them justice by going in and just blocking in a few colors real quickly. But you know, it's a piece of art, and an artist does what they have time to do. A big feature that I like to play with in Photoshop is different layer modes, multiply, screen. Adds a lot of power to what you can do in Photoshop. And there's my introduction of green, as I mentioned a little while ago. You know, I was listening to an artist not too long ago talk about the importance of, she felt like it was the importance of putting all of her color onto one layer, which I don't necessarily know that I agree or get that particular point. I like that to be able to control things and be able to change things, and maybe that comes from, you know, my commercial background and clients dictating. You know, you put all your heart and soul into an image, and a client dictates a basic change. You have to be ready to adapt to that. In fact, you wouldn't believe some of the complexity of files that we get into just to be able to affect any change that the client will ask for. But that's why I love projects like this. They're personal. There's no demands. It can stink. Maybe it'll be great. But there's no expectations, and that's a lot of fun for me because I can do whatever I want to do in that. Sometimes that means going back and changing things. So let's see. At this point, I've started to add a few white pieces in there. In fact, I was going to mention that about this. This turned out to be a little more challenging than I expected because, like I mentioned, I had this vision in my head that was kind of ethereal and couldn't put my finger on it. So when I went in to actually start adding the color and starting to paint it in Photoshop, I very quickly realized that I needed to design my color layout a little better. In fact, in the final piece, again, I think I could use another pass maybe on the color and the painting of it, because I was never really satisfied with where it went. It seems a little hodgepodge and mishmash, but that's, again, as I mentioned a moment ago, that's the nature of these projects. Something fun I like to do sometimes is take my my key line, which in the beginning is just black ink on paper, and what you can do with that is you can use one of the channels in Photoshop to load that as a selection, and you could fill it with black, but you could also fill that with any color of the rainbow. So a lot of times I will use something from the actual design, a darker color, maybe a complementary color, to fill as a key line. In this case here, you see I used like a dark brown. It kind of just went with the whole motif. It gives it a key line, but it's not so there and so powerful and so strict that it sometimes that can draw your eye away from the image. In fact, that's really an old trick. If you look in comics for decades, cartoons too, motion stuff, that's an old trick that artists will use to give a little more life and a little more visual interest to what they're working on. I was kind of sloppy with my painting on this. It was supposed to be very graphic, but the more I painted on it, the more I just was having a good time. In fact, I'm working with some brushes that I got from Chris Oatley of chrisoatley.com. If you're not familiar with his art cast, I recommend it highly. He's a great guy and does some terrific work, very inspiring. So let's see. At this point, I'm starting to add details and trying to paint depth into my image. In this case, trying to add some shadow to the interior of the boot to indicate light fall off and that there's some depth in there. Starting to paint highlights to give shape to the boots, which is kind of weird on this. Now that I think about it, I normally do this first. Usually when I'm painting a dimensional object, I try to model it, get the depth and the volume to it before going back and adding details like I did in all the scroll work and the painted leather of the uppers of the boot. So I'm painting my my rattlesnake now. No Texas image is complete without a rattlesnake embedded in there someplace. Anyway, I've been working on the Persian pickles the entire month of July. It's nearly the end. I'm a few days behind, but that's okay. I can let the deadline slide if I want to. I hope that you enjoy this, or it's educational or inspirational in some way. These things are such a ball to do, and I'm trying to morph this into something that is motivational for you. You see what I'm doing, and maybe you learn something, but hopefully by the end of the video, end of what we're watching, you're inspired to go out and do something of your own. So thanks for watching. I encourage you, please come back often to my site. I've always got new things there, and start a conversation. Let me know what you think about the work.